Nobody says this out loud, not clearly, not directly, but something fundamental has changed, and if you pay attention, you can see it everywhere without anyone needing to explain it. Men are no longer approaching women, not hesitating, not overthinking, just not doing it at all. They see someone attractive, they register it, and then they keep walking like nothing happened. And people look at that and come up with explanations that sound easy, that men are less confident, that they're afraid, that they've lost something they used to have. But that explanation only works if you ignore what's actually happening underneath. Because this isn't about confidence, it's about calculation. And once you understand that, everything else starts to make sense. Because the dating market didn't slowly evolve into this. It didn't gently shift, it broke. Not all at once, but completely. And not because men became weaker, but because men started seeing something they weren't supposed to fully understand: the cost. And once you see the cost clearly, you don't unsee it. You don't forget it. And most importantly, you don't go back to acting like it doesn't exist. Because there was a time when approaching someone was simple, almost neutral. You saw someone interesting, you walked up, you said hello. She either responded or she didn't. And that was the end of it. No record, no consequence beyond the moment. Rejection was uncomfortable, but it was contained. It didn't follow you home. It didn't attach itself to your identity. It didn't exist outside of that interaction. But now that same moment carries a completely different weight, because the risk is no longer emotional. It's social, it's reputational, and it can become permanent in a way it never used to be. Because now there are cameras everywhere. Not just cameras, but platforms, systems that amplify, distort, and preserve moments that were never meant to be permanent. And you don't need to do anything objectively wrong for that system to activate. All it takes is perception, one person's interpretation of your behavior, one moment taken out of context, one clip that turns you into something you never intended to be. And once that happens, you don't control what it becomes. You become a version of yourself defined by people who don't know you. And that uncertainty changes how men think before they even act. Because now the question isn't, what if she says no? It's, what happens if this goes beyond this moment? And when you introduce that level of uncertainty into something that used to be simple, the entire decision-making process changes. Because men don't operate on emotion alone. They assess, they weigh outcomes, they calculate risk against reward. And when they run that calculation now, the numbers don't make sense anymore. Because the immediate risk is no longer just rejection, it's visible rejection, public, shared, potentially permanent. The social risk is being judged by people who have no context, no understanding of who you are beyond a single moment. The digital risk is that this interaction could exist indefinitely, searchable, replayable, detached from the reality it came from. And then there's the long-term risk, the part nobody talks about openly, how a single misinterpreted moment can affect your work, your opportunities, your reputation in ways that don't feel proportional to what actually happened. And when you put all of that on one side of the equation, and then you look at the other side, what do you actually gain? Maybe a number, maybe a conversation, maybe a date. And that's assuming everything goes well. And even if it does, the outcome is still uncertain, still unstable, still part of a system where nothing is fixed and everything can change instantly. So men do what rational people do when faced with unclear rules and high consequences. They step back, not out of fear, but out of logic. Because when the environment changes, behavior changes with it. And this is what most people refuse to accept. They want to believe that men stop trying because something is wrong with them, because that explanation is easier than admitting the system itself has changed in a way that makes participation less appealing. But this goes deeper than just approaching, because even when men do engage, when they enter the modern dating system through apps, through social environments, they encounter another layer of the same problem. You're not meeting someone, you're entering a marketplace, a space where attention is fragmented, where options are endless, where comparison is constant, and in that environment, you are not building connection, you are being evaluated, instantly, repeatedly, and often superficially. And that evaluation doesn't happen once, it happens continuously, because there is always another option, always someone slightly different, slightly better in one dimension or another. And that creates a dynamic where nothing feels stable. Nothing feels like it's building towards something. Everything feels temporary, replaceable. And after enough time inside that system, something shifts in the man who is experiencing it. Not his ability, not his capacity to connect, but his willingness to keep investing in something that doesn't produce consistent results. Because at some point, experience overrides expectation. And this is where the deeper realization happens. Not when he fails, but when he succeeds. When he actually gets into a relationship, builds it, lives it, and then sees what it requires over time. Because relationships are not static. They demand energy, attention, adjustment, constant adjustment, managing emotions, preventing conflict, adapting behavior to maintain stability. And for years, many men accept that without question, because they believe in the idea of it, the idea of partnership, the idea of love, the idea that what they are investing will return something equal or greater over time. But eventually, something disrupts that belief. Maybe the relationship ends. Maybe it changes. Maybe it simply reaches a point where the effort no longer matches the return. And when that happens, something unexpected occurs. Not just pain, not just loss, but relief. The kind of relief that comes from the removal of something you didn't fully realize was weighing on you. Quiet, space, the ability to think without interference. And in that silence, clarity emerges. Because without the constant input of the relationship, without the need to manage, adjust, anticipate, the mind resets. And when it does, it starts asking questions it didn't ask before. What did this actually cost me? Not financially, but in terms of time, energy, identity, autonomy, peace. And when those costs are compared honestly to what was gained, the answer is not always what people expect. And once that comparison is made clearly, it changes future decisions. Because now the man is not operating on assumption, he's operating on experience. And experience carries more weight than any narrative he's been told. And this is where the shift becomes permanent. Because once you've experienced a life that is entirely your own, where your time, your space, your energy are not negotiated daily, where your decisions are not filtered through someone else's expectations, that state becomes the new baseline. And anything that threatens it is evaluated differently, not emotionally, but structurally. Does this improve my life or complicate it? Does it add stability or introduce unpredictability? Does it respect what I've built or require me to give parts of it up again? And for many men, the answer to those questions leads to the same conclusion. Stepping away is not a loss, it's a choice, a calculated decision based on what they've learned. And that's why the change you're seeing is not temporary, it's not a phase, it's an adaptation to a system that no longer offers the same balance it once did. And people can disagree with that, they can criticize it, they can label it however they want, but those labels don't change the underlying behavior, because behavior follows incentives. And when the perceived cost outweighs the perceived benefit, participation decreases. It's that simple. And once enough individuals reach that conclusion independently, it becomes a pattern. And that pattern is what you're seeing now. Not men giving up, but men choosing differently, choosing peace over uncertainty, control over chaos, stability over validation. And once that choice is made and reinforced by experience, it becomes very difficult to reverse, because you're no longer chasing something you think you need, you're protecting something you know you have. And that distinction changes everything, because the man who is protecting his peace is not easily persuaded to trade it away. Not for potential, not for pressure, not for a system that has already shown him what it requires and what it returns. And once you reach that level of clarity, you don't feel like you're missing out. You feel like you've stepped out of something that no longer aligns with what you want your life to be. And that's why men aren't coming back to how things used to be. Not because they can't, but because they've seen enough to know they don't need to. And once you see that clearly, once you understand the calculation, you stop asking why things changed, and you start understanding why they had to.